Hey everyone, in this video I want to share some philosophical ideas that I've picked up over the years that have been helpful in organizing my thinking about reality, about philosophy, about knowledge, and about people. These ideas primarily come from Robert Pirsig and two books that he has written. The first book is Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and the second book is called Lila. I won't get too much into the details of those books, particularly because what I remember most are the ideas and principles more so than the stories that were told in those books to communicate the principles. And I might mix up the ideas from one book or another, but the point still stands. These ideas have been very helpful to me. So the first idea that has been helpful to me is this idea that experience is the base level of reality. When it comes to utilizing a philosophical framework when assessing knowledge structures or humans or phenomena in general, one implicit assumption that we bake into that analysis is what we're defining as real or what we're considering to be real. There are some philosophical schools, such as phenomenologists or existentialists or pragmatists, that would say that the experience of the conscious observer, the subjective organism, is what is the baseline reality. It's the starting point for what's real. And then other components can be added on top of that, but we judge from those schools, we judge what is real based off what is experienced. And then you have other schools of thought, perhaps materialists or reductionist schools of philosophy that say, well, experience can ultimately be reduced down to some sort of information processing or some sort of causal, physical dynamic in the world that even if we're not aware of it, and even if we're not experiencing it per se, that is what is real. And so it's interesting to explore how the different assumptions you make in terms of your starting point, whether it's experience on one hand, for example, or materialist causation on the other hand, how you can get different conclusions about what's happening in the world, and you get different theories, and from different theories you get different predictions about what will happen. But for Pirsig, who explicitly, if I remember correctly, aligned himself with William James, who was an American philosopher and a pragmatist, I believe he founded the school of pragmatism. He was a radical empiricist. Pirsig believed that experience was what was most real. And the word he used was quality. I don't believe he ever defined quality explicitly, but he tried to hit it at different angles, because when dealing with very, very deep ideas and very deep metaphysical ideas, at some point you bottom out with your knowledge structure. And if you believe that humans are inherently limited in their ability to have knowledge, and if you believe that no matter what, we're going to be ignorant on something, well, then there are some concepts that we can't categorize and put into a box without falling short in some sense. So Pirsig believed that quality was experience, which was value. It was the thing that allowed you to differentiate masterpieces in art from average or mediocre pieces of art. And I believe he actually used one example where he had his students, or at least in the story, he had his students judge different essays, and there was a consistent consensus about which essays were better than the other. And he had them detail out why they believed that the essay that they collectively chosen to be better was actually better. And they gave different characteristics about the tempo of the writing and the elegance and the organization and the clarity. But the thing about quality is that quality can't be reduced to any of those traits. So it's something about the through line that goes between or goes through all of the traits that we deem to be good when it comes to assessing the beauty of something, the trueness of something, the goodness or the meaning of a phenomenon in the world that we're encountering. So for Pirsig, his starting point for his metaphysics of the world, for his understanding of reality, was quality. It was experience, or it was value. And I agree with that, and that's been helpful for me in formulating my thoughts about people and about how to assess different theories, whether they be scientific or philosophical or religious. I ground them in my experience, but I also ground them in indirect experience of the books that I read and the stories that other people tell me. So when it comes to a theory, and I'm trying to judge if it's true or not, or I'm trying to base it against reality, I base it against my experience. And it's tricky, obviously, because as I mentioned before, it's something that I believe humans are inherently ignorant in the final analysis. And so it's not obvious that you can always trust your experience, but that's a wrestling that we can get to perhaps in this video, talking about how it is that we go about generating our knowledge and using our experience to generate knowledge, where I'll invoke some of the ideas by Jean Piaget, who's a developmental psychologist, or also known as a genetic epistemologist. He was focused on how we generated knowledge structures. But going back to Pirsig, so the first idea that I learned from him that's been very helpful is that quality or experience is the baseline level of reality. Many philosophers and psychologists believe this as well, and I have spoken about some of them. You have William James, you have Carl Rogers. I would say Jean Piaget to some extent as a phenomenologist. Carl Rogers, I have learned a lot about applying Pirsig's notions, although Rogers didn't specifically talk about his notions from Pirsig or take his ideas from Pirsig, to my knowledge. I've learned the most about applying the philosophical framework of experience first in psychology from Carl Rogers. He believed that various neurotic conditions or psychopathological conditions manifested as an individual became unable to trust their own experience or to listen to their own experience. They would rather believe in a persona that was generated by the expectations of other people, and so they would actually suppress their real experiences, let's say their behavioral or emotional or cognitive experiences, and they would rather lean on what they think other people would want them to experience or feel. And so that disjointing between their lived experience and how they think about themselves or how they're acting, that discongruence or that incongruence was one source of a lot of psychopathological conditions or a source of anxiety and fear. So it's been helpful to read Carl Rogers and see how some of Pirsig's ideas could be applied in the psychotherapeutic endeavor. So first idea is about quality and value. Now in Lila, this is the second idea. Pirsig further differentiates what he calls the metaphysics of quality. So when it comes to reality, one common dichotomy that people invoke is the subject-object dichotomy. When they think about the world, they think, well, there's me and there's my own thoughts and there's my subjective experience, and then there's the world outside. I think this partly plays into the common question or cliche of, if there's a tree in the forest and it falls, and there's no one around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. Pirsig rejects that as the starting dichotomy. He believes that chaos and order, or what he calls dynamic and static quality, that's the actual true starting place for a metaphysical understanding of reality. So dynamic quality, well, that's chaos, that's change, that's potential, that's movement, that's the source of everything. That's the source of all knowledge, the source of all objects. It's the source of everything. And then you have static quality. In static quality, roughly speaking, it involves those patterns of value or those patterns of quality that, from an experiential perspective, stay the same. And so for Pirsig, there were four types of patterns of value. There were four types of static patterns of value. And at first you had the inorganic layer, and then you had the biological layer, social layer, and then the intellectual layer. And so for Pirsig, I hope this can be in the camera shot. So for Pirsig, his metaphysics of quality, his understanding of reality was that you started with chaos, you started with dynamic quality, and from here you got these four levels of static quality. You had inorganic, biological, social, and psychological or intellectual. And then all of these four static patterns of quality were trying to move forward into the future, perhaps you could say into the unknown or into the anomalous, back again towards dynamic quality. So chaos, four static patterns of order, and then chaos again. The biggest takeaway, which is kind of a more general principle from those ideas, was that things exist in layers. Things exist in layers of patterns. So the human being, us, we are all four, well, we're also dynamic quality, but we are definitely all four of those static patterns of value. We have a physical layer, we're made of atoms and subatomic particles, and then we have a biological layer, which of course is where life comes from, the fact that we're living creatures. We exist in a social landscape, in a social environment where we interact with other people and we interact with ourselves across time. And so we have some inkling about who we were in the past and who we're going to be in the future. And so from that aspect, you can think of yourself as a community across time as you are wrestling with who you were, who you are today, and who you want to be. And then we also have this intellectual level where we can abstract and we can wrestle with various ideas, and we're not necessarily bound to the confines of our social and biological environments, although we are to a very large degree. Carl Rogers also picked up on this as well. And so for Rogers, you had your baseline experience started with, at least it started with your emotions. So something happens to you, okay, you have an emotional reaction to that. Now, once you have that emotional reaction, somewhat later, you are then able to reflect and you have thoughts about the experience and those emotional feelings that you're having. And then you're able to speak that out loud. And for Rogers, your experience, the emotions that reflect the experience, what you think about the emotions that reflect the experience, and then what you say out loud, or perhaps what you communicate in nonverbal ways out loud. So maybe we can say this is the behavioral landscape. These all needed to be aligned. And if they weren't aligned, then that could be a source of anxiety or distress or frustration or some sort of negative emotion. And for Rogers, one of the ways to help decrease the level of distress and reduce levels of anxiety through the psychotherapeutic relationship was to communicate through the relationship with the client or the patient or whoever's in distress that it's okay to listen to your true experience, and through the psychologist or the therapist or the friend themselves being authentic and being genuine and being congruent, the hope would be that that could be reflected in the therapeutic relationship to the person who is in distress, and they could see that, okay, well, it's okay to be my genuine self, and I can perhaps now recognize that there's a disjointing that's going on, or there's some elements of me that's incongruent. So the idea from Pirsig, the second idea, is this notion that reality, and thus more specifically humans, exist in layers, and things can occur at one level of analysis that may or may not be related to another level of analysis, and there could be conflicting or contradictory phenomena that are going on at these various levels of analyses. And so when you're trying to dissect a problem, one of the first questions you have to ask yourself is, well, what is the proper level of analysis at which to interpret this phenomenon if I want to solve the problem. And that's been very helpful in my day-to-day life. It was helpful for me when I was a process engineer, and it's also helpful to me as I'm trying to work through these various theories, get a better understanding of the human nervous system, of the human psychology, and even as I'm trying to understand the political landscape, recognizing that one of the first questions you have to ask yourself before you dive headlong into the problem is, what's the correct frame or lens of interpretation that I need to wear as I'm trying to understand what's going on. All right, I'm gonna end the video there. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.